The next few things I'd like to talk about are just some really nice resources that I want you to think about when you're trying to simplify your library so that users can use it more effectively and more efficiently. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is signage. How can we create signage in our libraries to make it easy for those non-readers to possibly find books in your library? So one of the things that I'm providing, and again, you'll find this in our Canvas course tonight under the resources, are some Dewey dividers. So when I open up the link here, you'll actually see them. It's actually a list of all of these. So it has the Dewey number, and then it has images that kind of help illustrate that particular Dewey range. So that students, if they were looking at these, they could kind of see, oh man, right there are books about military just by looking at the pictures, or here are our folk tales and fairy tales. And these Dewey dividers are actually sized to work perfectly on the binder of one of those big thick notebooks that we have lots of in the school libraries, but it will also fit on the back of those cardboard magazine boxes. So think about some different ways. If you would like to use these, feel free to print them off, use them. They're free for you to use, okay? Another idea that I would like to share with you is a way that you can simplify a kind of strange topic for students. Searching in a library could be a little awkward for kids. So one of the things that I've done in the past is develop a PowerPoint to simplify the organization of a library so kids could understand it better. So as you can see, I had a little person or personality that was in my library. This was TJ. Our mascot was the Tigers at Union Hill. So TJ would go through and he would visit the library community. So no matter what age the students in the library were, we could talk about what kind of books lived on the check-in street. And it just really went through the process, right? To scan their own book, and then they would put it on the cart. And the cart had top shelf was everybody books. The middle shelf was fiction street. The bottom shelf was nonfiction street, or whatever order they happened to be in. But so the children in the class were aware of their communities. They either rode the bus, or they were car riders, or they walked, but they knew about their communities. So I tried to break up the library into this kind of community setting. So you'll notice we had reference street, fiction street, technology street, nonfiction street, and everybody street. And it kind of grew. We would talk about what the spine label looked at like, and then we would also discuss, and many of you are kind of getting rid of your reference sections, but we talked about the fact that the top letter told them what street the book lived on, and the bottom letters told them what house that books would live in. So it was really kind of easy for them to understand that this was their address label. And so if I said top, they would say street. You ever played that game? Top, street, top, street. If I say bottom, you say house, bottom, house, bottom, house. So the kids could easily determine that when they looked at the spine label of the book they had, or if this was one that I wrote, obviously here, that the F would mean it belonged on Fiction Street, and the GRU meant that it belonged in the G house. So that kind of, I also talked to my students about the fact that books are like my children. They like to go home with other people. They like to spend the night, but they always know where home is. They want to come back to the library. That's their home. And so my kids like to go visit, but they want to come home, and to make sure that they brought those back in their book bags. But you can kind of see when we talk Technology Street, they were, that was kind of our search stations. If we talk Nonfiction Street, this was the only one that was a little different. So if we had numbers on the top, that was meant an indicator that it was nonfiction. If we talk about everybody books, so these are books that are not true, just like fiction, but they have many pictures. They're a one sitting book, where the fiction was a book that would take more than one sitting. So you saw the different definitions that were there. And so we actually had a playaway street. It really grew. We had not graphic novel street. You can tell it just kept kind of going. And we also went through kind of circulation and how to check out. But it had a little quiz at the end, so kids could raise their hold the correct number for the questions that were here. So when you go through here, which street do you visit to find a chapter book to enjoy in your spare time? I would ask them to hold up 1 if it was reference street, 2 if it was fiction, 3 if it was technology street, 4 for nonfiction, and 5 for everybody. So you can see pretty easily a chapter book that you could enjoy in your spare time would easily be number 2 there. And when they clicked on answer, it would pop up Fiction Street. So we had all of these really great quiz here at the end. Now you see that the purpose in this was truly just to simplify the library setting so that they could see that it wasn't difficult to manage if they just kind of had a better understanding. So we were simplifying the organization of the library just in our signage and in our organization so that they could easily find the kinds of books that they were looking at. These are the kinds of things I would do early in the school year or right after Christmas to remind students about the library. A third one might be something for open circulation. And this type of PowerPoint I might put up at a kiosk kind of setting. So put it on automatic play kind of thing so that it could talk about the students. And again, I'm using TJ as my personality because he never graduates. He's always in my library. And he gave us a nice little personality that I could also send on field trips, and students could write in their blog about what did TJ do on the field trip to Raleigh, right, with the 4th graders, kind of a flat Stanley kind of idea. But it talks about them hugging their books, checking in by not touching the computer, that E is everybody, F is Fiction Street, numbers indicated nonfiction street, so they had to look at the spine label. Once they did that, they knew what shelf to put things on. So E was top, F was middle, and then the others were the bottom shelf. And then we also talked about shelf markers. I know some people are not fond of those, but I used paint sticks, and he showed everyone how to use the paint sticks to look for different books in their library. And then again, how to bring it to the circulation desk, how to scan their own card. They used their lunch cards at the time. And then to scan their book to go out. I have actually seen a really great idea from a media specialist. She would take the paint sticks that, you know, you can get free at Home Depot or Lowe's, and she would actually put their barcode on those sticks. And she had Pringles cans, and she would decorate that for the class. And so every class would put their paint stick in the cans, and they had their barcode on them, so that when they came up to the circulation desk, they scanned their shelf marker with their barcode on it. They scanned their books, they put their shelf marker up, and they sat down kind of on their Aloha carpet. So that's kind of a management tool if you're in a school library. If you're in a public library, think about the different ways that you could still manage your library space or manage big groups of children when they're looking for books and they're using shelf markers. So sometimes just walking through the procedures will help have a much calmer experience as your students are going through that, and your children, depending on their age. Another great resource I wanted to share with you that will help your students become a little more independent in the library is bookmarks that kind of help them find that just right book. So we talked about in the past the 5-finger rule, right? If it's a 0, if they read the first page and they miss 0 or 1 word, it's probably a little too easy. If they miss 4 or 5 words, it might be a little too hard. Try reading it with a buddy. But if they miss 2 or 3 words, that book might be just right, right? So it's a really good idea to just kind of train your students on how to be independent in choosing books to make sure it's that just right book for them. There are lots of different bookmarks and reading procedures. Put them on bookmarks, put them in infographics, put them on your wall. Just make sure you review those strategies with your students to help them be more independent in your library space, whether you're in public libraries or in school libraries. Another great resource I'd like to kind of spend just a few minutes talking to you about are Lightbox books. This is normally, if we were all together, I would say, has anybody ever seen Lightbox? Again, I have this demo site linked on our PowerPoint for today, but it's also in Canvas. And I'm actually going to take just one of these. These are ebooks, And I just want to show you some of the great opportunities that are here. So what's the first thing I'm imagining you're noticing about this book is that it's moving, it's alive, it's interactive, right? And that's exactly what your reluctant readers need in many cases. Although your more seasoned or more confident readers will also enjoy this type of book. Once you click here at the bottom, once my mouse, I can find my mouse here. Once you click to open this book, it has quite a few tools. It really actually shows you the table of contents, really. And then down here on the bottom corner, you'll see a few features. So if you have they become brighter, you'll see that when I hover over a particular tool. So this one has video. So just about every page there seems to have, audio. If I click on video, that would be just page 10, 11, and 14 and 15. Some pages have activities embedded within them. There's quite a few here, 3 different pages. Some have web links that you can see. Quite a few have web links. Some have web or slideshows embedded, not any in this particular book, but that's a tool that many of the Lightbox books do have. And then there's also a transparency tool and Google Maps. We're actually going to look at these two in class. The rest of them I'll let you kind of play with on your own. And then there's some at the very end, there'll be a quiz. There may be keywords to teach and a share link, as well as some different activities and things. I actually want to talk to you about the transparency page. So if I go over here, I'm going to select one of those pages, give it just a minute to load. And on the far left, I'm going to click transparency. So you notice that I see different spots on my map and I see some nice little definitions that match those. If I click transparency, what happens, right? Everything pops off of your map and you can talk through in more detail if you were presenting this book to the whole class about number one, where the Nile River actually is, right? And kind of point to that in more detail. And then it kind of just takes one at a time and brings those back. If I were to go home, that takes me back to my home page again. I may want to also go over here to this page. And I want to say, let me do transparency on this one. And it's a great timeline. So I can walk through and we can be more specific in actually how we're covering this information so that I can bring things in a piece at a time and talk about each one of them. Another one of the really cool tools I like with Lightbox books are the Google Maps. So let's go back to that page we were here. And this time, instead of clicking the audio, which is nice, or the web, or the transparency, I want to look at the Google Maps. Now, you notice what happened. I've got some things blinking. When I click on one of these areas, I can take my little person here. I can drag him over here. Okay, come ahead. Oh, let's do a different one. I think this one comes out nice. There we go. I didn't give it time. It actually lands you there so that you can do a virtual tour and they can see exactly what the landscape looks like in that particular part of Africa, right? If I were to choose another one, so let's look at the Sahara Desert and let's see if anything's different there. I can pull it over, give it just a minute. I think that's what I didn't do before. I have to make sure there it goes. I've got to make sure I give it some time. It's asleep today. So now we can see what's different in the landscape that's in this part of Africa versus the other part. The other was lush and green. This has some green in the distance, but it's really a lot sandier, right? So we can look at those different components, those different pieces, and do that map piece. Teachers generally really love that. If you're working with parents and you're doing a story time in your public library, they will also be very impressed with that. So if you have a chance to look at those Lightbox books, there are several here that are free for everyone to look at. They're kind of their marketing tool. I've not seen them change them. So just to give you a heads up, there are some in different languages. Most are for elementary but they do have some really nice science connections here in middle school area. Okay, middle and high, so secondary. So there's quite a few different resources. So if you haven't checked out Lightbox Books, I definitely suggest you do that. Let me show you this really quickly as well. On week 9, when you scroll down to the bottom part here, right after the assignments, there are all of the resources that we shared in class this week. So there's the Lightbox link, as well as the Dewey dividers, the library community PowerPoint, and the procedures for open circulation. Feel free to download those, edit them any way you want to, if you'd like. Just note they're there for you to edit and use, make them your own, okay? All right. Another thing that we need to think about when making our libraries more independent for our students to use and our children to use when they come there is about the parents and educating parents about how best to support their students and children as they're learning to read. Think about the infographics that are already put together. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Find some really great resources. This is one in particular, one I like, that talks about everything from development and word choices and how to walk through and help children decode words, right? So just a quick guide as they're trying to do that. And it includes, you know, not only print material, but also encouraging some digital. So think about some different infographics that you can choose to support the learning of the students and the children that are in your library space. Now, I want to talk a little bit about why all of this is important. And I've seen this graphic, this data rather, shared in lots of different infographics. But this is one of my favorites because I think it's just really plain and obvious and right there in your face. So first off, I want you to look at child A up here, the one that's in blue. This child has read 20 minutes a day. Now we encourage that. That's what we want them to do. But if we look at the data about this child, if they do that, they're going to have read 3,600 minutes in a school year, which is over 1,800,000 words. And those students traditionally score in the 90th percentile on their end of course or end of grade testing, because they're more familiar, they're more confident in the vocabulary that they're reading. They're able to just connect better because they have a higher level of understanding, just because they have practice at it. We're all better at things that we've practiced, aren't we? So that's kind of what child A looks like. Do you have any of those in the story times or the classes that you've taught? You see those children. They're the ones that are just eager to pick up another book most of the time, as long as we don't limit them too much in their choice. If we look at child B, they've only been able to read 5 minutes a day. That's only 900 minutes in a school year. And that's only 282,000 words a year. Now, those children, while they're not as successful as child A is over there, they still score in that 50th percentile on standardized testing most of the time. And then child C, unfortunately, is where many of the students that you're working with in your after school programs, that's where they are. Many of the students you're working with on the day-to-day basis, those of you school librarians, these children average about a minute a day. Now that's, things that are happening at home, homework assignments, parents reading with them. Not all children have the same level of support, but that ends up only being about 180 minutes a school year. Could you imagine? And those students are the ones who are struggling. So when we encourage and we motivate students to want to read, doing different activities, different things that will encourage them on their way, that is how we're going to keep our students reading, is by making it a fun process for them. And then they're going to want to do it. So not limiting them on the books that we offer, really, but really just encouraging them. Those summer reading programs that your public libraries are putting together, they help prevent that summer slide. They're keeping a book in children's hands to build their confidence reading. So think about how you can do that. All of the things that we talk about in the class are so important to help support that. I've taken a particular infographic today because I want us to talk a little bit about this. And I really like this particular illustration of kind of what students want, what parents want in the books that they're reading, and what we need to make sure we're providing. So the first thing here is choice rules. Students, children that you've worked with, their favorite books are the ones that they have picked out themselves. So be that advocate in your library and in your school building for, don't give them a reading list. Challenge them to read a particular genre, or if an English teacher has to assign a reading list, have them choose 3 or 4 titles that the kids can at least choose from. So they have some say-so in the books that they're reading. 89% of the students surveyed believe that. They want to have choice in what they're reading. When you start to select for them, they start to not want to read, right? So we can motivate and encourage and do some readers advisory to talk to them about how books are alike and different, but we've got to make sure we're encouraging them and giving them the opportunities to choose the types of books they want to read. The second point on this infographic was, I want good stories and laughter. Parents and kids say that when they're choosing children's books for fun, it just has to be a good story. Some children just want to laugh. Think about the kinds of movies you like to watch. Do you want to cry every time, or do you want to laugh some? So the majority of students or children who participated in this survey, and parents, they said they just want a good storyline and they want to be able to laugh. So think about some of those that we've talked about when we were doing our Newbery. Many times those don't necessarily make me laugh, they make me cry. But they do have, a very good storyline for the most part. Another thing they're looking for are strong characters. They're looking for characters that might be smart or brave or strong, but they've just got a strong dynamic of some sort, right? That maybe they want to see how they challenge or how they overcome adversity. So they want to be able to see students being kind of successful in that. In education lingo, we call that enabling text. We want to see children and adults that look like them in successful situations. And so as we're putting together our collections, we need to make sure that we're providing some of those, or a lot of those. Another thing that's important is to think about the diversity in children's books, and that diversity goes beyond just culture. So in this particular survey, in this research, they found that 73% of the students and parents that they talked to wanted to see people and experiences that were different than their own. So not children that were exactly like them, right? They wanted to see what people of other cultures and countries and abilities and how they were dealing with those. 68% wanted to see those various cultures and customs and religions. 51% wanted to read books about people who are differently abled, either physically or emotionally. Think about Wonder, right? Al Defo. What are the books about people who are differently abled? 47% were interested in books about people of color, and 21% in LGBTQ. So lots of different options there. So making sure that we have collections, choices of materials and literature and picture books in our libraries that kind of meet all of those different demographics are very important. Before we finish tonight, I'm going to give you a resource to dive a little deeper into finding good resources to support finding some of these multicultural titles. I kind of shared it with you the night we talked about the book review. Tonight, you're going to have a little more time to dive into maybe a different resource that's on that table. There's too many to do just one time. When the parents and students were asked about their top 5 books in the series, number 1 seemed to be Harry Potter. Dr. Seuss is still very, very popular, as well as Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the Magic Treehouse books, and the Chronicles of Narnia. All of those, even though some of those are classics, they're still very popular. If we also think about other series, this is where I would kind of ask you a question in class and have you type that in. But think about the books that children and teachers are asking you for now that would be different series. I can think definitely about Pete the Cat. That's one that all of your kindergarten teachers are all about here lately, as well as quite a few other series that deal a little bit more with more diverse characters. So think about the options there that you are providing for your students. Now I'd like to take just a moment and talk about what multicultural literature is. Now, one of the things I absolutely love, you know, I'm a Kadir Nelson fan. This is a video. Let's see if it will let me play that. This video talks a little bit about Kadir Nelson's process of how he did research to support developing a quality title. Let's see, I think I need to pull that from, yeah, I'm going to pull that from our Canvas page for today. This is the one I think I like the best. Yeah. So let's spend, it's only about 4 minutes. And I want you to listen to in this the research that he's done.
Of the Major League Baseball season.
I'm sorry, the research that he's done to make sure that the images that he's drawing are authentic, because that's what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is not only defining multicultural literature, but analyzing it. What do we need to ensure that the books that we're choosing have in them to attract the students so that they have value in the books that are there?
Tomorrow marks the official start of the Major League Baseball season. It's a sport whose fans span generations, classes, and ethnicities. But for many decades, baseball, like a lot of activities here in the United States, was segregated along racial lines. African-American players were banned from playing in the major leagues. In response to that ban, the Negro National League was formed, and it thrived until 1947. Now, in a new book, author and artist Kadir Nelson looks back at the league and offers an illustrated tribute to the men who realized their dreams by overcoming great adversity.
The story of the Negro Leagues is the story of pride and determination, perseverance, and excellence amidst adversity. When they were traveling, they weren't always able to stay in hotels where they played because many white hotels wouldn't take them, wouldn't house them, so they would have to find a rooming house or an African-American owned hotel or sleep on the bus. While I was a student at Pratt Institute in the mid-90s, I was commissioned to paint a painting on the Negro Leagues, and it was a subject I didn't know much about. So in doing my research, I came across the Ken Burns documentary, Baseball, which was airing on PBS. And I was introduced through the documentary to Buck O'Neill, who was a former player and manager, and he told the story of the Negro Leagues in such a charming and compelling way that I really fell in love with the history of the Negro Leagues, and that one painting grew into over 40 paintings over the span of 7 years, and the creation of this book. The book is a tribute to the Negro League. It's not a bitter retelling of how terrible it was for them to play baseball. It's a tribute to that great independent spirit that the Negro League players had. In 1920, Rube Foster, the former pitcher, player, and manager of the Chicago American Giants, formed the Negro National League. And in keeping with that independent spirit, he said, "We are the ship, all else to sea." And I'd describe it as the Declaration of Independence of the Negro Leagues from the major leagues, since African American baseball players were banned from playing there. As a result of seeing all these fans attending these great Negro League spectacles, the major leagues took notice and they decided to open the door for African-American players to play in the Major League. So Branch Rickey seized the opportunity to integrate Major League Baseball, being the first owner of who would take a chance and hire an African-American player to play on his team. And he signed Jackie Robinson in 1946 to play with the Brooklyn Dodgers. For the image of Jackie Robinson, I decided to depict him on his first day with the Brooklyn Dodgers, April 15th, 1947. In setting out to create the content for this book, what I did was I read a number of books on the Negro Leagues. I interviewed a few players, Buck O'Neil being one of them. I watched a number of documentaries, and then I also bought an old uniform, replica jersey, and I borrowed some pants, and basically suited up as a former Negro League player, so that I could literally put myself in the shoes of a former player. And I wanted to make sure that the folds in the uniform looked like the folds would actually look. I wanted to make sure that when I painted these pictures that the light fell as it does in nature, so I could tell the story in a very authentic way. Well, many of the owners of the Negro League teams knew that once the major leagues decided to take black players, that it would mean the end of their leagues, because they knew that they would take the best from their leagues and leave the Negro Leagues out to dry, which is exactly what happened. It's kind of a bittersweet ending to such a great institution, but this is what they worked for.
So when I watch this video, I think about all of the work, right, that they've done to, or that Kadir Nelson does to research and authenticate the images that he's drawing, the content that he's writing about, so that the students, when they read this book, or children, when they pick up this book, are going to be able to tell that it's an authentic book about that particular person in history, or in depicting a certain culture. Another thing that I find that I have to do, and I talked about this when I read Petit Rouge, I cannot speak that dialect at all. So if I were to read parts of this book, many times I may look for an authentic voice that reads that. So looking for particular audio books, or finding these books is a great way. Let me bring it up here. Of course, I had to have a, there we go.
First inning.
So think about me trying to read this book and see if you think it would be more authentic if you heard it in this voice.
Beginnings. I ain't ever had a job. I just always played baseball. Satchel Paige. Seems like we've been playing baseball for a mighty long time. At least as long as we've been free. Baseball's the best game there ever was. It's a beautifully designed game that requires a quick wit, a strong body, and a cool head.
Now, do you think the students would be much more engaged when they heard that voice reading this book? It definitely helps it become a little more authentic, doesn't it? When I define multicultural literature, I think of it as, well, it is defined more broadly as books about people and their individual experiences within a particular culture. That might include mainstream cultures. It might include other cultures that maybe are marginalized, right? Usually it's defined more specifically as literature by and about groups that have been marginalized and disregarded by the dominant European American culture in the US. Think about your collections. What kind of face do they have, right? What kind of culture are they promoting? Depending on when your collection was initially built, it may be very strong in that same area. This definition includes racial, ethnic, religious, and language minorities, and those living with physical or mental disabilities. Think about LGBTQ and people living in poverty. Those are all things that could kind of define this kind of multicultural thought process. It doesn't have to be just cultural. It doesn't have to just be physical. It could be many, oh, you may not be able to hear me. It could be many of these different kind of areas that we haven't thought about. Think about the students that work and come to your particular libraries, the communities that you serve. Are they dealing with immigration? Is that a topic that you might have to focus on and make sure you have books to support? Are they refugees from a particular country? Many times they kind of move all in one area. So that might be the communities that you're serving. Also think about people who are adopted, or military families who potentially, in those communities, there are lots of people who are amputees and dealing with those kinds of stresses. So think about the populations that you serve. Is adoption something that happens quite frequently? Do you have a program in your community or in your school to support autism and children with that are autistic? So how can you kind of support them with your collections? So when we look at what's available, that's the next part, right? We may have these great intentions, but how do we know what's available? I want us to go back and I want to show you a few infographics, and some of these you've probably seen before. But when we looked at the diversity of children's books that were published, okay, this is what we would see in 2012. 3% were about African Americans. About 1.5% were about Latino. Less than 1% were about Native Americans. 2% were about Asian Pacific Americans. And 93% were really about Caucasians. That's definitely not diverse. It is getting better. So in 2015, American Indians are still below 1%, but Latinx have moved up to 2.4, Asian Pacific Americans at 3.3, African Americans at 7.6, Caucasian Americans or Caucasians, white, is at 73.3. So it went down a little bit, but they added a category that's kind of that inanimate area, or animals, trucks, things like that weren't in that other one. So that was at 12.5. So we're still predominantly not as diverse as it should be. One of the more updated ones, okay, this is from 2018. So we're getting a little bit closer to where we are now. 1% still barely is Native Americans. Although in the last 2 years, there has been a push to produce quite a few more of those. So they are becoming a little easier to find, but it's still not popular. 5%, so we moved up to that 5% in Latinx, 7% Asian Pacific Islander or Asian Pacific American. We're up to 10% in African American, and 27% are animals and others. So that's kind of grown too. And then white is still up to 50%. So if we look at kind of what these numbers look like, we've still got a long way to go. And what's hard for us is finding where we're going to put, not where we're going to put these, but how to find the titles to support the needs that we have. In education that is multicultural and intercultural is one in which diverse cultural perspectives are woven throughout the curriculum and school life, instead of being the focus of one specific book or unit. So it should be kind of embedded. That's the information we're looking for. Our text also says that quality multicultural literature includes, number one, understanding one's own personal cultural identity. So got to do that first, and helping children do that about theirs. Valuing the unique perspectives of those cultural communities. Connecting to the universal experiences that are shared across all cultures. Critiquing the inequities and injustices that are experienced by specific cultural groups. And also by developing a commitment to taking action for more than just an equitable world, right? So making sure that we help students that are in our libraries, communities that are coming to our libraries, making sure that they can kind of see both sides. And they can't see that if they're not reading books where those students are present. Okay. Remember that quote. I've kind of got it right here at my desk from the video about Pura Belpré. It's fundamentally unique experience, the person said, to read about characters that you can identify with, right? Well, that's what we need to help is students find themselves in the literature that they're reading. All children need to find themselves or find their lives and their cultural experiences reflected within classrooms, within the books that they read. But this is much more likely to occur for children from a mainstream European American family, right? Culturally responsive curriculum focuses on the need to develop reaching strategies and materials that are more consistent with that cultural orientation of ethically and globally diverse students. So how are we going to do that? So let's talk a little bit about what does culturally responsive mean and really kind of define it this way. I'm going to say you are culturally responsive when you find reading materials that are relevant to children's lives. That's a goal of ours, isn't it? 2, you are culturally responsive when you ensure that literature collections and libraries and classrooms reflect the cultural diversity of the community and of the world that you're serving, that they're in, I'm sorry. The next one, you are culturally responsive when you give children a choice in their reading material. Man, that's the 3rd time I've said that tonight, right? In many different areas, not just in motivating students to read, but also in being culturally responsive. You are also being culturally responsive when you conference with children about their reading as often as possible. Talk to them, listen to them, build a relationship with them about the books that they're reading. Sometimes that could be your ticket out the door. Our library should include a range of books that reflects the diversity and the complexity of your culture or of a culture, of their culture. It should have materials that builds from awareness of children's own cultural identities to consider points of view that go beyond their own. Literature also provides a window to that ethnic and global cultures through the in-depth inquiries into a particular culture and the integration of multiple cultural perspectives. So kind of think about what you're providing and if it's doing that for the students that you're serving, for the children, for the parents, and the patrons that you're serving. And all of this kind of builds value, all right? And by that, I mean, it gives young people who are members of a marginalized group or recent immigrants, maybe, it gives them the opportunity to develop a better sense of who they are. It develops an understanding of an understanding of and an appreciation for diverse cultures, that windows and doors mentality. You're going to see lots of videos to support that as we move forward in talking about our passport to multicultural literature. But also bringing alive those histories, traditions, and peoples that that they can connect to. There's also a value that's there that's when we address contemporary issues of race, social justice, religion, poverty, exceptionalities, sexual orientation. Those are all real things that are a part of our society. And so students are going to they're going to get information about those somewhere. So we need to make sure we're giving them accurate information. And real life experiences from those people that have lived it. From the perspectives of members of those groups, that's where it becomes authentic. To provide a more complete understanding of current issues and of the people who belong to these groups that might be challenging prejudices and discriminations. Also think about the adding the perspective of those marginalized groups and global cultures to the study of history, thereby, right, giving children a more complete understanding of those past events and making a better connection to it. All of these things help young children realize the social injustices endured by particular peoples in the US and around the world, both now and in the past. Some of the things that they're dealing with are not just things that happen in this generation, are they? And these things help build a determination to work for a more equitable future. That's kind of how we're passing the story down. Also building children's interest in peoples and places that they're reading about, providing authenticity through literature written by insiders to a country or region or ethnic group, and allowing members of that group to define themselves. This develops a bond of shared experiences with children of other ethnicities and nations and enables them to acquire cultural literacy with kind of a global perspective. So when we talk about multicultural literature, it's so much more than just culture, isn't it? Or race. There's a lot more that we need to kind of think about as we're putting that together. So when we look at ways that we should evaluate multicultural literature and international literature when we're selecting it, there's a few things that we need to point out. One is authenticity. And that's one reason I shared with you the video that Kadir Nelson did. Understanding, with him, it was what it looked like. He wanted to make sure it was authentic in the way that the folds of the fabric even. But he also went and interviewed, and he did research to support the authenticity of the language that he was using and those cultural beliefs and values from the perspective of that group. Many authors do very detailed research so that they can speak from that authentic voice, right? There's lots of debate out there if a person from a different race or a different culture can actually write a book about a different culture that they're not a part of in an authentic way. So I think there's definitely room for debate there. Accuracy of cultural details and text and illustrations. So is it accurate? Is it depicted in an accurate way? I can, as again, talk about many different authors. If we talked about Mary Pope Osborne, for instance, who does the Magic Treehouse series, she researches to a very high level, travels to the country, follows the people around to understand their culture before she writes about it. I can also talk about Jan Brett, who does the same thing about many of the books that she writes. You can look at her webpage and understand her travels to different places to make sure that she's accurately depicting the culture of the story that she's giving. Many of them are folk tales and fairy tales, so she has to bring that culture with her as she's interpreting it. And sometimes it's a retelling of a folk tale or fairy tale from a different culture, and so she has to make sure she's embedding that into her books. Another is the integration of culturally authentic language. When I played for you that excerpt from the book Kadir Nelson wrote about the Negro Baseball League, We Are the Ship, it had that authentic language. Many times, if I can't do that language justice, I will bring in an audio book to kind of work with me as I'm sharing a particular title. Maybe it's a dialect from a particular language, or maybe it's, as this one was, from a cultural kind of perspective. Also, that particular book, Male Female, is another thing to look at to kind of for its authenticity. Power relationships between characters are important, and students seeing that. Perspectives in the audience, balance between that historic view and the contemporary view of groups, You remember, children don't like to kind of be pushed at, preached at or pushed. So they want to see that that's authentic there in that balance, as well as that adequate representation of any group within a collection. So making sure you know the communities that you're serving and making sure that you have put together a very strong piece of that. So again, this was the why. You can tell looking at all of these different steps that you would look at to authenticate or evaluate multicultural literature. You can see why I brought these particular titles to the table today. Both the audiobook and understanding from the author and illustrator's perspective, the type of research they do and how accurate they are trying to be in their interpretation of that story. All right, I want to talk just briefly. That kind of brings us to the end of just defining what that is. We're about